Naomi Shihab Nye is an American, an Arab, a poet, a parent, a woman of Texas, a woman of ideas. The daughter of a Palestinian father and an American mother, she's lived in Old Jerusalem, in St. Louis, Missouri, and now with her own family in San Antonio, Texas.
If you tuck the name of a loved one under your tongue too long without speaking it, it becomes blood, sigh, the little sucked-in breath of air hiding everywhere beneath your words. No one sees the fuel that feeds you.
So the fuel that feeds you is the power of words.
I think so. The power of words and a faith in the power of words, that words can give you something back if you trust them. A little girl said to me last year, "Poetry has been eating all my problems." And I said, "What do you mean by that?" And she said, "It just makes me feel better when I read it or when I write it." And I think that's been true for many people in this country.
It's Big M here. You've asked me to read the poem Kindness by Naomi Shihab Nye. Before you know what kindness really is, you must lose things. Feel the future dissolve in a moment like salt in a weakened broth. What you held in your hand, what you counted and carefully saved, all this must go, so you know how desolate the landscape can be between the regions of kindness.
Every time you care about something or somebody that relates to a different place in the world, then your empathy grows.
Oh, I felt very lucky as a child to have open-minded parents, and I knew they were open-minded because they were unlike any other parents I met. My friends' parents seemed very much to me as a child that I was living in a poem, that my life was the poem. And in fact, I certainly wasn't thinking about a career. I just thought of myself as having a practice, If you have a practice of writing, then you have a lot of pieces of paper on your desk and you could share them if you chose to. And it seemed more exciting or illuminating to share them and see what happened next than to just keep them for myself.
Giving all my love and all my support and all my gratitude to Feminist Press. The amazing, amazing badasses who make books like this.
Zipper Mouth came out on Feminist Press, and it takes a brave press to cover a book like this, to take it on, to put it out into the world, to get it into the hands of people like me who love it so much and who really need it.
In my hand, I am holding an amazing new play, Now There Were Men, by Katie Capiello. It's published by my good friend Jennifer Baumgartner and her wonderful team at the Feminist Press at CUNY.
Listen, we need the Feminist Press. We need good feminist works in this moment. We need a feminist revolution, y'all. This is our opportunity to strike a blow to the patriarchy. So please, 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 give today. Support feminist work. The revolution needs you.
I hope you support the Feminist Press and put these on your students' bookshelves.
When I was a child and growing up with Feminist Press books in my home, this book was one that was very striking to me. This book is I Love Myself When I Am Laughing. I am deeply honored to be building on the legacy of Florence Howe, who had a broad vision during a time when it was very bold and courageous to talk about centering the voices of women, feminists, people of color, and others whose voices were in the margins. The Feminist Press has never been afraid to publish books that others might deem too radical, too risky, or too controversial. And we're unafraid to deal with the nuances of women and non-binary people's lives and to air them out with respect and dignity and without judgment. There's a reason that authoritarian regimes go after intellectuals first. There's a reason why historically they have burned and banned books. And that is because books are powerful. In this moment, what I feel called to do and what our team feels called to do is to ensure that our books inspire people to vote, to run for office, to take action in their communities, to stretch their minds and to stretch themselves so that they're thinking and acting in ways that will benefit not just the present, but the next generation.
I really believe that there's still much to be found. I don't know if anybody's looking. That's the question.
The founding of the National Book Critics Circle in the early 70s was a singular idea. The collective intelligence of John Leonard, Ivan Sandroff, Nona Balakian was not merely unique, it was welcome and it was needed. It was a kind of wild faculty of sorts, dedicated to books and their scrutiny. Passionate people, eager to laud and reward the best. And then the years passed, and this organization became more than unique, it became necessary.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited for this year's list of finalists, and I can't wait for our special guests to share them with you. But first, we are also here tonight to celebrate 30 years of the Nona Balakian Citation for Reviewing. The prize is named after NBCC co-founder Nona Balakian and was first awarded in 1992 to George Shalaba. In his acceptance, reflecting on links between book criticism and The Gift by Lewis Hyde, Shalaba said, "We've all had our gifts awakened, ourselves evoked by books, and we're all looking to pay the debt, to pass the gift along." The citation has since gone to many more wonderful critics, including those joining us tonight to talk about the art of criticism and to announce this year's prize winner and finalists. In 2012, our dearly departed board member, Greg Barrios, began funding the award with a $1,000 cash prize, an example the NBCC continues to follow with our new Awards and Fellowships Fund. If you would like to donate to the fund, please click the button at the bottom of your screen. Big thanks go out to Maris Kreisman for taking the lead on tonight's event, and to Jane Chabatari for envisioning and organizing the upcoming panel. Thanks to Sarah Russo and Suzanne Williams for helping us get the word out, and to Shannon McKenna and Ruben Quesada for the graphics. Another big thanks to Michael Schaub for keeping our tweets, newsletters, and website up to date, and a special thanks to Jared and Julia Drake at Wildbound PR for producing another year of virtual events with wonderful style and aplomb. We will now switch to 1 month ago me speaking with 4 amazing critics, followed by remarks from Pulitzer Prize winning poet Peter Balakian. Here with us now are 4 previous winners of the Balakian Prize, and I am so excited to learn what they have observed about book criticism during the course of their careers, and to hear their thoughts on how the craft has evolved over the past few decades. They are Joe Livingston, Daniel Mendelsohn, Harl Sagel, and Katie Waldman. Joe Livingston has worked as the staff writer for culture at the New Republic since 2017, where their reviews earned the Balakian Citation for Excellence in Reviewing for 2020. They have written for the New York Times, the Times Literary Supplement, Book Forum, and many other publications. Livingston grew up in London and moved to New York for graduate school. They received a PhD in medieval English literature from NYU in 2015. Daniel Mendelsohn's reviews, translations, and essays on literary and cultural subjects have appeared frequently in numerous publications, most frequently in The New Yorker, the New York Times, and the New York Review of Books, where he has been editor-at-large since 2019. He has also been a columnist for BBC Culture, New York, Harper's, and the New York Times Book Review. Mendelsohn's books include the memoirs, The Elusive Embrace, Desire and Riddle of Identity, a Los Angeles Times Best Book of the Year, The Lost, A Search for 6 of 6 Million, which won the NBCC Award, the National Jewish Book Award, and the Prix Medicis, among other honors. And The Odyssey, A Father, a Son, and an Epic, named the Best Book of the Year by NPR, Newsday, the Christian Science Monitor, and Library Journal. His 10th book, Three Rings, A Tale of Exile, Narrative, and Fate, was named a Kirkus Best Book of the Year and won the Best Foreign Book Prize in France. His other honors include the George Dean Nathan Prize for Drama Criticism, a Guggenheim Fellowship, and the American Academy of Arts and Letters Purcell Prize for Prose Style. Mendelsohn's essays and criticism have been collected in 3 volumes, most recently, Ecstasy and Terror, From the Greeks to the Game of Thrones. He lives in the Hudson Valley and teaches literature at Bard College. Harl Sagel is a staff writer at The New Yorker. Previously, she was a book critic at the New York Times, where she also worked as a senior editor and columnist. She has won awards from the New York Press Club and the NBCC for her criticism. She teaches in the graduate creative writing program at NYU. Katie Waldman is also a staff writer at The New Yorker, where she writes mostly about books, language, and culture. Recent work includes reviews of new books by Joy Williams and Alison Bechdel, a profile of the showrunner of the TV show Dickinson, and an essay about the mainstreaming of therapy speak. Katie was previously a staff writer at Slate and the host of the Slate Audio Book Club podcast. She won the Balakian Citation in 2019, and in 2018, she won the American Society of Magazine Editors Next Award for journalists younger than 30. Katie was born in Washington, D.C., and splits her time between D.C. and Brooklyn. She has a dog named Otto, which perhaps we'll see, maybe not. So thanks to all 4 of you for joining tonight. We have a few questions. We'll give you each a chance to answer them in alphabetical order. If there's time later, we can have some more discussion. The first question, we'll start with Joe, is how have critical standards shifted in the past 3 decades?
I was just frantically trying to calculate alphabetical order because I couldn't figure out if you were going to go by first name or last name, and then suddenly it landed on me just exactly as you were saying my name. Well, I am. Sorry, did you said over the last 30 years, right?
Past 3 decades, but if you have a better answer for the past 2 decades, or you want to widen the lens a little bit, that's fine too.
Well, I'm only 34, although I thought I was 33 until last week, until I found out I was actually 34. But so I don't want to make the sweeping pronouncements that I do actually think, about how things have changed over the last 30 years. I don't know. I feel I must defer to other, I don't know, more professional critics in this event. But I think that critical standards, at least in the United Kingdom, where I grew up reading reviews in the newspaper, mostly in The Guardian, also occasionally in The Times, we had that at school. I think that, I'm not sure sure that I can speak for how the critics think about books, but there used to be more space, so there used to be more negative reviews. And I think that I used to grow up reading reviews of a wider variety and structure. And now everything having been, narrowed and constricted by all of the kind of anti-critical forces of our culture and economy, right? That's one of the things which has gone in purely in my anecdotal experience, I'd say structure, range, and cruelty.
Hey, Daniel.
Well, I've actually have been writing criticism for just over 30 years, so I may be, although I'm not sure that makes me necessarily an expert on the phenomenon you're writing or asking about. I think it's hard to talk about the evolution of critical standards without, of necessity talking about the evolution of critical media. When I started in the very late 80s, there were only magazines and newspapers. There literally was no other way of doing criticism. Barely, I might add, even Amazon reviews, which were just starting. I remember I published my first book in 1999, and that was like a new thing. So I'm saying this because I think the vast expansion of outlets for critical discourse from the, quote unquote, professionals who are writing for newspapers, websites, whatever, to, I don't want to call it amateur, that's not a nice, but sort of popular criticism as expressed through blogs, websites, etc., even, all kinds of websites. To my mind, it's been a great improvement, actually, because you hear more voices, and I know it certainly affected the way that I've written over the years, knowing that there are so many alternatives to the sort of official, sort of handing down the 10 Commandments kind of posture that one sort of felt in the late 80s and early 90s. So I think there was a lot of hostility, I think, at the beginning between the early lit bloggers and the sort of traditional critics. But I think that all has sort of, well, not all, but a lot of it has died down. So I think there's more space now to do more kinds of things. That's what I have noticed. So when I first started writing, I was a gay guy trying to break into the literary world. And so I only, was noticed by and writing for gay publications about gay books, which drove me absolutely around the bend. And I think that kind of thing, we've passed. And that will necessarily, I think, have an effect on the way that you engage with the work. When you don't, I remember feeling a lot of pressure at the beginning to sort of be nice to gay novels, putting it baldly. And, that kind of thing has gone the way of the dodo bird, I think, which is a good thing. I mean, I think, with Joe, I think there have been downsides to this expansion. But, overall, I think the standards have, I don't want to say gotten worse or better, but I think they've become more refined and more expansive, which has to be a good thing.
Okay. Carl.
Yeah, I think there's a lot that I would agree with and a few things I would disagree with what's been said before. So I recently wrote a piece, not recently, a couple months ago, for the book review at the Times Book Review celebrating 125-year anniversary. And I went back and read so many more, reviews from the past. And I mean, the first thing I noticed, this is a small thing, but for all of us, for me, Joe, Daniel, and Katie, it's huge. They don't quote. They didn't quote. There was no evidence. There was so much pronouncement. It was just this sort of grand, like, let me fling some adjectives on the page and you'll know and I know, and that's what it was. And I think right now what I see is so much more, what Daniel was saying, is more care, is more rigor. You make a claim, you support it, So that's one thing I think has changed. But Joe is also right. Like there's been a great contraction of, for example, newspaper reviews. There may be other forms that we can write criticism and can access criticism, but I even remember when I fell in love with criticism in high school, and I would just, read tons of it. For every book, you could count on 20, 30 serious reviews in papers. It was just an ordinary thing. And now you have like 5 or 6, 7 maybe. And I miss that, both for a feeling of the diversity of opinion, but also those are places that supported writers to some degree. You could see a critic's evolution. They would write for different places, they would grow. And I miss being able to watch people change in that way, and sort of keep thinking in public in that particular way. And I think with the expansion, though, because there is this wealth of critical opinion that we all access, whether it's reviews or on Twitter or anywhere else, sometimes I think it puts pressure on the reviews themselves to stand out. I feel like there's a sense, and not everybody writes this kind of criticism. I think the criticism I love most, or the reviews I love most, are like the mixed, semi-tortured review, the yes but review. I love it, but I feel like there's a pressure on the critic to sort of either anoint or destroy to have it stand out. And that I find a little tiresome, but I don't know if it's not a widespread thing, but I definitely, when I've noticed that, I sort of, I find that dismaying. But those are just a handful of things I've seen. Generally speaking, I think I'm pretty bullish on the future of criticism. It feels like every couple of months I'm discovering, a new critic who I really enjoy and want to follow.
Okay, thanks. Katie.
Yeah, I think all of this is really insightful. At first, when you asked the question, I wasn't sure whether you meant critical standards for literature or standards for criticism. And I think probably there is some conversation between those two things, because of course we have standards for critical standards for literature. But, it's tempting to almost say that more has stayed the same than has changed, because when I think about the types of criticism that you could find at any point, there was always the sort of bread and butter straight review. There was always the kind of provocation, the voice driven, like shot fired. There are always these sort of lyrical, personal essays that wove in analysis. And I think the change I would see, just to echo what's been said before, is just more of all of the above. And, so there's perhaps still a lot, there's a lot of maybe the reviews for which the standards are lower. There's a lot more kind of dross. There's also a lot more like really, really wonderful criticism, and going in all kinds of directions, just mapping that entire space of what a book review can be. And so I actually just think it's maybe quantity over quality, if we're going to try to sort of define the shift.
Yeah, and we'll get into like questions of what a book review can be when we talk more about craft, and also when it comes to like the what we bring in when we are assessing the book itself. I'm curious, about some of what you all have said about these different types of reviews, like, and especially what what Parla was saying about this pressure of either like anointing or destroying with the piece to get attention. And there is one of the functions of a review is it must pass judgment, but also as critics we're engaging with things that are not just the book that we're reading. We're thinking about where it fits in with the culture and politics and in other books and the space of literature. And so I wonder, maybe we can just go around really quick, what you all think about that. Like if there are other ways, other maybe other types of pressures that come up when thinking about how to make a review really make its mark.
What you mean now versus in the
past?
Well, I think it's interesting, as we went around, what started to kind of cohere, I think, in terms of like figurative I don't know, kind of like metamorphic or tectonic images of somehow something contracting and expanding at the same time. And I think perhaps I think, I always think of there being fewer reviews around, but then Katie was just talking about proliferation. And I suppose what I mean is fewer paid reviews, right? And fewer paid reviewers. And that's a function of, the budget shrinking, while perhaps even, the demand for opportunities to write as well as opportunities to read, right, has burgeoned to be perhaps almost universal, or perhaps something that you expect of a young person, that they may have some textual identity, text-based identity online. And so if that kind of, the big expansion of the number of words published, right, by technically, legally, in legal terms, number of words published versus number of kind of dollars allotted per word for professional reviewing. I mean, that's an invisible, it's not invisible, but it is one of those like big sucking forces. I think that's why the term tectonic came to mind. And it's something that's very difficult to get a handle on, for me, at least. That's how I felt, very much like in the world rather than able to access any kind of Archimedean point outside it to describe it. But at the same time, I mean, some of the best, I think some of the best minds addressing these problems are doing it through writing books, thank God. So, I mean, it's kind of an excuse to, or a reason to pursue these questions, I think, through a lot of new fiction, is very, very concerned with exactly, I think, these kind of intangible changes, which are, the brainworms are in there, and they're sometimes coming out through sometimes I feel like they're coming out through my keyboard, but yeah, I don't know. Inconclusive.
I don't know. If you're interested in sort of kinds of pressures that are being brought to bear on the profession that have evolved, certainly, this is going back to something that Parul was saying before, this sort of, look, there was no such thing as social media 30 years ago. That, if you're present on these things, that's exerting a kind of pressure. That's exerting a kind of pressure that was unknown 30 years ago to sort of basically, quite often sell your own reviews or encapsulate them or announce them, or, and once you become part of that economy, it becomes, you're sort of manufacturing your own clickbait, and it's, I think that's a kind of a decisive factor. I mean, I'm sure we try to avoid doing that, but I think once you're in the economy of certain kinds of social media, you're often boiling down and packaging, what ought to be, and I here again am agreeing with something that Parul said before, I always say all reviews should be mixed reviews. And when you are in the social media world, as we know, it's hard to be nuanced and mixed. And so I think that's kind of exerts a certain kind of pressure, maybe not on the actual writing of a piece, but on, how one is presenting one's work in the world.
Yeah, I just wanted to flag how charming I found Joe's points about the language we were using and pointing it out. This is why I love talking to critics. They're reviewing the conversation as it happens, which I really like. But I don't know. Yeah, when I think about pressures on the profession, I think we've all talked to, brought up a few points about that. I think I'm also always very interested about internal pressures when you're writing criticism and what it means to do this work for a long time. There are the external pressures, right? Where am I going to write for? Who, can I get paid? What's the assignment? What are the books, et cetera, et cetera. But then there are a whole host of internal pressures when you sit down and you've been doing this work for a while. How do you stay sensitive? How do you not parody yourself? How do you not just write in a sort of formula, especially if you're doing daily reviews or, being a columnist, as we've all done, how do you not parody yourself? How do you not fall into certain habits of mind or shorthands of language? And all of that, I think, is such a part of the job. You know, when you sit down every week, you're really in conversation with yourself, your own tastes. Where do they come from? What are my blind spots? You know, so that's a whole other set of demons, but also like interesting pressures that are always present with us, I think, in the room.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much there that I'd love to respond to. The first, I mean, I will curse this conversation by invoking the attention economy, but that is sort of implicit in your question, right? Like, if we're all trying to get a limited amount of attention, like, does that have a distorting or exaggerating effect on our arguments? I also think, though, that there is, as Daniel was mentioning, a kind of a pressure on individual reviewers, not just to respond authentically to the book, but to sort of have a different take, like to differentiate their take, their argument from this other, you know, all the other reviewers. And so it's almost in this sort of Amazon genreification of other goods. You sort of have your voice and your take, which is occupying its particular place in the market. I know this sounds like really soulless and awful, and I don't think that critics are actually thinking in this way as they're writing, but it does seem to be, if you like go 3,000 feet up, something that's happening. And then to sort of speak to the internal pressures, I think that sort of sense that you are producing a particular type of criticism that is your type of criticism does become an invitation to stagnate a little bit, to not challenge your own taste, to not grow. And I just, you know, I'm actually pretty moved listening to Parul talk about sort of being in conversation with yourself, because I think one of the big challenges of this work is to like not let your taste just like solidify and you know, hold you in one place forever.
Yeah. So getting back to the books, and we zoom in a little bit here, what considerations must the reviewer include in an assessment of an author's work?
I'm going to kind of sneakily link that back to what we were talking about before, because to extend it to considerations of the marketplace, because I don't know, I'm quite fond of the literary attention economy as it exists on the internet now. I think I was a part of it before I wrote book reviews, and I joined it because being in graduate school, for me, I was really young. I moved to New York. I was all but kind of like by myself, and I was stuck in this world of medieval manuscripts, you know, alone, essentially, and feeling lonely. And I joined Twitter, I think, in the early 2010s for that reason. And I was immensely comforted by it, you know, to my own chagrin. But like, it was really personally helpful to experience other people's enthusiasm, and to be able to and then to be able to speak back to that. I mean, let's take the word community in like inverted commas, but I think I mean it a little bit, right? That to be able to then go back and sort of like pour work back into that that pot, or wherever the metaphor is standing currently. But I still have lava on the mind, because when Katie was saying solidifying around you, I was thinking of lava again. So yeah, I like to think about what will be useful to people. And I think that's why I want to give a different take to other reviews I've seen before. It's why I want to be careful picking books, I think. You know, I think that anybody writing criticism who's fortunate enough to have that legitimizing masthead above your name, and to have a byline that people trust and come back to, I think that is, I don't know, I personally feel it to be a tremendous privilege, and I think that it's, I mean, not to be like everyone should be grateful for that, but I do think that it's a service you get to provide a service that is growing rarer and rarer and may almost be, you know, on the brink of being unique to those people. And all those people on the internet are like actual people. You know? So I think they like book criticism. It's wild. So my considerations are I don't know, my faceless friends on the internet at times.
Well, I would pick up on a word that Joe just mentioned, which is service. You know, my great mentor in publishing, Bob Gottlieb, a great editor, always likes to joke, but it's not a joke, that criticism is a service industry. And I take that very seriously. So I always think that the great consideration is the reader. The reader is interested, but doesn't have the time that you have to do the homework, to do the thinking. And that's what I think my job is. And the way that translates into the way that I write criticism is context, tons and tons of context. You know, do the homework, read all the other books, do some thinking about the author, not in the sense of the author's feelings, but, you know, who this person is, what have they built? And I always feel like, you know, the questions that you want to answer for the reader are, what did this book want to do? Did it do it? And was it worth doing? And so to me, I guess the consideration is, what are you handing to the reader? You know, part of the excitement of writing criticism, I'm sure we've all experienced this, is sort of experiencing the drama of coming to your own conclusions. And that's what I think makes criticism interesting to read. I mean, that's the kind of criticism I like to read. How is this person arriving at an interesting conclusion about something? So to me, that's the big concern. And then you're handing it in a package to a person who's interested in the book, but hasn't had all week to read everything the person ever wrote and spend a lot of time thinking about where this new book fits in with the rest of the books, or, you know, whatever the considerations may be. And that, I think, is something you need to do for the reader. You know, whoever that reader is, the people on the internet, the people reading the New York Times or the New Yorker or the New York Review of Books or websites or whatever.
Yeah, I agree with Daniel's point about service, and I think my notion of service also extends, you know, past the point of you know, telling a reader how to spend their money or their time, but then to also create something aesthetic and tasty and useful for them. And I'm cognizant of the fact that most people reading reviews probably don't read the book, you know, so this is the one chance that a lot of them, especially nonfiction, they're going to get a chance to sort of wrestle with some of the ideas that you've liberated from the book, and any other biographical information. As Daniel was saying, you get the, you know, privilege of putting it into context. You get the privilege of pulling it into conversation with other books or other things that you're seeing. But secondly, I mean, I think your question, and my former colleague Dwight Garner would always tease me by saying, you know, how many apples do you think you can fit into that basket? Because I liked all the apples. You know, I want all the gossip. I want all of the, you know, the kind of biographical criticism that somebody like Elizabeth Hardwick could do. You always want to do that. But space and where you're writing from are huge factors that determine how much you can fit in and how you're being read. You know, so if you write for the Times or you write for a paper, you're going to be first, you know, sometimes. You're not going to be definitive necessarily in that particular way. So you have a different, or at least I had a very different sense of how I was being read and the service I could provide, you know, and so much more that I think I would privilege, you know, being impressionistic, giving a sense of what it's like to read the book sometimes. You know, this is what it feels like in a body. This is what it feels like in conversation with other things I'm thinking about. You're writing something, however, for like the New York Review, you're writing something for the New Yorker where you have more time, you have more space. You can do something like, for example, what Daniel did when he reviewed A Little Life, one of my favorite reviews of all time, right? Where it comes after the fact and you can look and say, what were those reviews about? You know, you can review the reviews a little bit. You can review the reception and try to understand that. And that's a separate sort of almost, you know, mini genre within it. But there's so many different kinds of ways of being useful and harnessing information, I think, and giving it to the reader.
Yeah, I think that's all very well said. And instead of sort of trying to rephrase the wonderful points that you all have made, I wonder, I agree with the idea of service, but one conflict that sometimes seems to emerge is that service to the book is not necessarily service to the readers. So if you're trying in a review to surface like an interesting thing that the reader will want to chew on, like something like an interesting way that the book fails, but perhaps on the other hand, maybe the book succeeds very straightforwardly in another regard, and that is actually like more defining of the book than the interesting failure that's kind of under the surface. And I do sometimes wonder, because I think my inclination is to err on the side of, make an interesting argument, do something, as Parul said, hopefully aesthetic. But that doesn't necessarily mean honestly responding to the book and to the proportion of elements that make up the book. And so I wonder how you guys sort of wrestle with that.
Anyone want to answer that before we get into more craft considerations?
I would try to evade that very complex thought in, I hope, an interesting way. Because it's food for thought, what Katie just said, and I really need to think about it. But one thing I think it's worth considering, which might touch, Katie, on what you were just referring to, is, look, you can't always, a lot of what we can do, serving the book, serving the reader, all these very interesting ideas, depends on the medium, and Parul just brought up this piece that I did. If you're doing a review 2 months after a book comes out with 4,500 words, you can do a certain kind of service that you can't do if you're writing 800 words in New York Magazine the week that the thing comes out. So I would just say that our response to Katie's thought should be inflected by, the realization that there are different lengths, different deadlines, different, all of those things. It's not, this is a very, good moment to make a point, which is reviewing books is not a monolithic thing. There are all different kinds serving all different purposes, and it's worth remembering that. But I will now ponder your point, Katie, because I think it's very interesting.
Yeah, I would add to that just by saying the whole, sometimes the fun of the review, certainly like the great difficulty, is that issue of balance, right? Like how much context, how much opinion, how much this, how much that. And I think it's always very helpful to remember that the reader knows they're reading one person's opinion. They know they're reading your take, So when you flag something because it's appealing to you and it's, charming or strange, or you're going to do it in a way that sort of says, I'm bringing this up because I'm writing this review and I'm speaking to you. And in that way, the criticism is a performance also. We're not alembics. We're not like instruments that measure and sift. We are riffing and talking and sharing and conspiratorially whispering, So I think that all of that work, though, the sort of whispering, gossiping, which is very important to me, very central to the process. You can do it comfortably if you've done the work of saying, actually, answering some of the questions that everybody's mentioned. What is this book trying to do? What is this book in the service of? What is this writer's work been in the service of? What are the big animating questions, not just in this book, but across this career? I feel if you do that judiciously enough, you can have some fun and sort of say, now let's pick apart this odd little passage or this strange little image and I think, inject some of your own personality, your own sensibility into it a little bit.
I agree. And I think it's important not to have too much respect for the amount of work that appears to have gone into something. Does that make sense? Sometimes you get like a mass, 700-page book about the Peloponnesian Wars or something, and it has this heft and presence, which isn't not actually anything to do with writing. It's just, a kind of like paraliterary, I don't know what you would call it, but it's something else. And so sometimes I think that it's important, it's always important that anybody who's published a book to give that author, try and figure out what they would do, right? And what they were trying to do. And whatever size that may be doesn't reflect on its importance, I think, and whether the size of the book or the size of the idea or the size or volume of the style. I just think that sometimes I think it's good to cultivate a little bit of healthy disrespect, a little bit of, I'm not a big fan of negative reviewing for negative reviewing's sake, but I am a really big fan of funny reviewing. And it's quite difficult to write a funny, completely positive review, I think. How's that? I mean, everything should be mixed, right? But mixed but funny. How's that? Yeah.
If I can just jump in on something that Joe said, because I think it's a considerate, and it's sort of, Katie, relating again to what you were thinking, and now I'm going to speak as an author who has been reviewed rather than a critic who writes reviews, it's going to sound Pollyanna-ish, but I swear to you it's true. If you do the work, because this idea, Joe, of disrespect, healthy disrespect, no author minds that if you've done all the other things. Parle, the context, the biography, I think most people really just want to feel that they have been taken seriously and evaluated seriously. And I honestly think that's what you want, more than just a good review, or maybe at a certain point in one's career, that if you have done all this other work, it means a lot to an author to be contextualized. And if you have been contextualized, being disrespected a little doesn't hurt, if you see what I mean.
This is great. Someone out there after this will take Joe's challenge to write a positive, funny review. We'll see if it lands. All right, well, thank you all so much. This is a really great conversation. Really appreciate all of your thoughtful and generous responses. Really, really enjoyed this. Thanks so much.
Thank you, David.
And now we'll go to Peter Balakian to offer reflections on his aunt Nona. Peter Balakian is the author of 8 books of poems, 4 books of prose, 3 collaborative translations, and several edited books. Ozone Journal won the 2016 Pulitzer Prize for Poetry, and his forthcoming book of poems, No Sign, will be published by the University of Chicago Press this year. He is Donald M. and Constance H. Rebar Professor of the Humanities, Professor of English, and Director of Creative Writing at Colgate University.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Jane, and all of you on the NBCC board. My aunt, Nona, would have loved to have been on the panel that just happened with such extraordinary critics and reviewers. And I know my whole extended family on various continents will be very proud that Nona is being honored as she is today. Nona would be greatly honored to know this prize has been awarded in her name for the past 30 years, and she died 30 years ago in 1991. I want to say a few things about Nona's life and her career. Nona was the daughter of 2 intellectually passionate parents, Koharig Panosian and Daron Balakian. Her mother held a MA in French and education from L'École Normale at Chartres, and her father, an ophthalmologist, received his MD at the University of Leipzig. The Balakians fled their comfortable home in Constantinople, now Istanbul, as refugees of the Armenian genocide carried out by the Turkish government against its entire Armenian population behind the screen of World War I. After an arduous journey, the Balakians arrived in the United States in the mid-1920s and soon occupied the corner apartment at 116th Street and Broadway, facing the Columbia campus, where Nona lived until her death in 1991. Her sister, Nona Balakian, was a distinguished scholar of French literature and taught at NYU for decades. For the record, my father, Gerard, the non-literary person of the three, he was a physician, was her younger brother. Her sister Anna's influence on Nona's intellectual development was large. Because of a childhood illness, Nona was homeschooled until 9th grade when she was given a scholarship to Horace Mann School for Girls, where she excelled, and was then admitted to Barnard College, and after that to Columbia's Journalism School, where she received an MA in 1944, after which she was immediately hired by the New York Times book review editor, Robert Van Gelder. She soon became the first woman editor at the Times Book Review, where she'd worked for the next 44 years. At the book review, Nona quickly became known for her tenacious commitment to literary writing. Literary was her word, her creed, her religion. She became a warrior for the literary, for challenging complex works of fiction, poetry, literary nonfiction, and literary criticism. When commercially oriented editors-in-chief were brought in to the Times Book Review from time to time to boost sales and advertising, Nona dug her heels in, demanding that books of high literary quality be reviewed prominently. I know this because I've interviewed her colleagues of those years who expressed their own amazement at Nona's fierce commitment to the literary. Nona was petite, had glistening dark eyes, a winning smile, a generous spirit, and always dressed with style, with a Parisian scarf, a gold brooch on her dress. And the men who towered over her at staff meetings were jolted by her intense advocacy for literary books. Literature was Nona's life, and when she left the office, she was always still at work. She was a nurturing supporter of so many writers, reading their manuscripts in galleys, talking with them through the ups and downs of a writer's life. She was the first editor to prevail on the book review to review university press books in the late 40s. She was instrumental in getting the TBR to review small and independent press books. She fought for writing that was avant-garde. Anais Nin, Marguerite Young, Walter Abish, Natalie Sarraut, among others, and for writers whose moral and psychological visions were carried by powerful transformations. T.S. Eliot, George Bernard Shaw, Kurt Vonnegut, Eudora Welty, Carson McCullers, Saul Bellow, Ralph Ellison, William Saroyan, among others. Her critic heroes were T.S. Eliot, Edmund Wilson, and Lionel Trilling. Although Nona wasn't a political activist, what she did for women writers at mid-century was, in a quiet way, revolutionary. She fought for women's voices. In a time when women writers were often marginalized, she helped create spaces for many of them, including Virginia Woolf, her lifetime friend Eudora Welty, Carson McCullers, Anais Nin, Alice Munro, Marguerite Young, Joyce Carol Oates, Sylvia Plath, Muriel Rukeyser, Gwendolyn Brooks, Natalie Sarraut, Ivy Compton Burnett, and many others. In 1972, she joined the Women's Caucus at the New York Times and signed the famous open letter demanding of management equal pay, fair opportunities, and an end to obstacles facing women. Those strong women of 1972 put the Times ahead of many businesses across the nation where patriarchal structures were still immovable. When Nona founded the NBCC Award with John Leonard and Ivan Sandoff in 1974, she was excited by the new concept of which she had been dreaming for a while, of having literary journalists and critics determine the best books of the year. Because as she said to me, quote, "We as reviewers have a special kind of discernment because we see so many books each year and we write about them with care." She believed that literary journalism was a craft and vocation that mattered to the wider society because, quote, as she wrote, serious literary journalism was a serious literary journalism could influence currents of thought and modes of taste and action. To all her large extended family, she was a force of goodwill and kindness, warmth, generosity, and love. You can do it, she would say again and again, no matter what the obstacles, you can do it.
Thank you, Peter. That was wonderful. And now, before we announce the 2021 finalists, we have some prize winners to announce. Here is Carlos Lozada, winner of the Balakian Citation in 2015.
Thank you, David. My name is Carlos Lozada. I'm the nonfiction critic at the Washington Post. The National Book Critics Circle awards the Nona Balakian Citation for Excellence in Reviewing each year to recognize outstanding work by a member of the NBCC. The citation is awarded in honor of Nona Balakian, a founding member of the National Book Critics Circle, where she served as the board's first secretary. The NBCC will continue the tradition established by board member Greg Barrios, who passed away this year, by awarding $1,000 to the recipient of the Balakian Citation. This year's finalists are Merve Emre, Christoph Irmscher, Julian Lucas, Jeremy Leibarger, and Jennifer Wilson. And the winner of this year's Nona Balakian Citation is Merve Emre. Congratulations to her and to all the finalists. Now I'll hand it over to Jacob Appel to introduce the Sandroff and Morrison Awards.
Thank you, Carlos. Before I present the awards, even though this is a highly festive occasion, I think it's important to remember that there are writers imprisoned around the world in places like Iran and Eritrea, and writers whose voices are silenced in places like Xinjiang, and we should keep them in our hearts and minds because they can't yet celebrate. Now I'd like to turn to a far more happy occasion and take the privilege of presenting the 33rd Annual Sandroff Lifetime Achievement Award. Ivan Sandroff was a longtime book critic for the Worcester Telegram, who along with John Leonard and Nona Balakian founded this organization nearly 50 years ago. As anyone knows, organizing book critics is like herding cats. And in those days, it was like herding cats who thought they were lions. And yet somehow as a visionary, Ivan Sandroff managed to do it. The award is given to a person who has, over time, made significant contributions to book culture. Nominees come from our membership in our board, and in this case, I want to specifically credit Anita Felicelli for nominating this winner, in part because when she first mentioned this writer, my initial reaction was surprise. And then after about 5 seconds, it seemed obvious that this was the person who had to win the award. And I imagine when I share this with you, you will have the same reaction. First surprised, and then after about 5 seconds, it will seem as if nobody else could possibly have won. And now I have the privilege of announcing our winner of the 33rd Sandroff Life Achievement Award. It is the brilliant and incomparable Percival Everett. And I imagine you were surprised, and now you were thinking he was the obvious winner. Now I have another privilege, and that is to present the annual Toni Morrison Achievement Award. This award is given to an institution who has over time made significant contributions to our book culture. Unlike Ivan Sandroff, Toni Morrison needs no introduction. She truly was a lion, and in so many ways, the most influential writer of the past 50 years. I do want to thank Toni Morrison's son and her estate for giving us the privilege of using her name in honoring this year's winner and this award. And this winner will be a surprise for a different reason. because this organization has played such an indelible and important role in modern literature that you will think it's won the award before, even though this is the first year we're giving out the award. Its influence transcends its role in advancing Black poets because it has become a model for advancing deserving voices across literature and has truly reshaped our literary landscape. It is my privilege to announce that the first winner of the Toni Morrison Achievement Award is the Cave Canem Foundation. And finally, I have an opportunity to introduce one more extraordinary individual. That is Megan Labrise.
Maybe I needed a prompt.
Thank you, Jacob. Hi, I'm Megan Labrise, chair of the John Leonard Prize for Best First Book. Named for NBCC co-founder John Leonard, this award honors outstanding work by debut authors, as John Leonard did consistently throughout his storied career. It is currently the only award determined by the regular membership, as opposed to the board. So, without further ado, the John Leonard Prize finalists are After Parties by Anthony Visna So, published by Echo. Detransition Baby by Tori Peters, published by One World. By Monticello by Jocelyn Nicole Johnson, published by Henry Holt. Philomath by Devin Walker Figueroa, published by Milkweed Editions. Pop Song by Larissa Pham, published by Catapult. And Somebody's Daughter by Ashley C. Ford, published by Flatiron Books. Congratulations to all the finalists. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Patrick Radden Keefe, winner of the 2019 Award for Nonfiction, and Morgan Parker, winner of the 2019 Award for Poetry, who will present this year's finalists in autobiography, biography, criticism, fiction, nonfiction, and poetry.
Hey, it's great to be with you all, and what an honor to get to present some of these finalists along with Morgan. So the first category here is autobiography, and the finalists are Hanif Abdurraqib for A Little Devil in America, Notes in Praise of Black Performance, Jeremy Atherton Lynn for Gay Bar, Why We Went Out, Rodrigo Garcia for A Farewell to Gabo and Mercedes, A Son's Memoir, Darren Negrifa for A Ghost in the Throat, and Albert Samaha for Concepcion and Immigrant Families' Fortunes.
Next, we have the biography category. Susan Bernofsky for Clairvoyant of the Small, The Life of Robert Walser. Keisha M. Blaine for Until I Am Free, Fannie Lou Hamer's Enduring Message to America. Rebecca Donner, All the Frequent Troubles of Our Days, the true story of the American woman at the heart of the German resistance to Hitler. Mark Harris for Mike Nichols, A Life. Alexander Nemerov, Fierce Poise, Helen Frankenthaler, and the 1950s New York.
The next category is criticism. The finalists are Jenny Diskey for Why Didn't You Do What You Were Told? Melissa Phoebos for Girlhood, Jesse McCarthy for Who Will Pay Reparations on My Soul, Mark McGurl for Everything and Less, the novel in the age of Amazon, and Amia Srinivasan for The Right to Sex.
Next, my beloved poetry category, with thanks to all the poets who you'll hear from for their wonderful books. B.K. Fisher for Sieve, Sonika Kelly The Renunciations, Rajiv Mohabir, Cutlish, Chisweo Mpanza, The Reinhardt Frames, and Diane Seuss for Frank Sonnets.
Next up, we have nonfiction. And the finalists here, so this is weird. I swear I had nothing to do with this and just found out about it a few minutes ago. This is not me hijacking the proceedings, but my book, Empire of Pain, is one of the finalists for nonfiction, alongside Joshua Prager, The Family Row, An American Story, Sam Quinones, For the Least of Us, True Tales of America and Hope in the Time of Fentanyl and Meth, Clint Smith, for How the Word is Passed, and Rebecca Solnit for Orwell's Roses.
Congratulations, Patrick. How exciting. What a special moment to be part of. And also just a moment of thanks to all the nonfiction writers and journalists in general for just all of your hard, brave work, without which so many evils would be unearthed. So thank you. All right, the fiction category. Joshua Cohen for, I'm sorry, I knew I was gonna do this. Netanyahu's, Rachel Cusk for second place, Sarah Hall, Burnt Coat, Honoré Fanon Jeffers, The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois, and Colson Whitehead for The Harlem Shuffle. Those are your incredibly talented, incredibly diverse nominees for the National Book Critics Circle. Congratulations to everyone.
Congratulations.
Thank you, Morgan and Patrick. And thank you, Morgan, for your comments on nonfiction, which I second completely as a member of the nonfiction reading committee this year, which was a huge joy. And Harry Washington, our chair, was incredible in leading us through a great list of books this year. And congratulations, Patrick, once again, for an incredible book, really an act of courage. Thank you also, Carlos and Jacob and Megan. This has been a real treat tonight. Thank you again to Wildbound and the entire NBCC board for all of your hard work. The award winners will be announced in a live virtual ceremony on March 17th at 7 p.m. We will open up the registration early next week, so please stay tuned, and thank you for joining us tonight.